Welcome back. The time is 29 minutes before the top of the hour, and you're still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salalo Makwidiri. And as I mentioned before we went to the break, we'll be turning our focus to the recent diplomatic rift between Mali and Ukraine. In a dramatic escalation, Mali has cut diplomatic ties with Ukraine following accusations that Ukraine was involved in a deadly attack on Malian soldiers and Russian mercenaries from the Wagner Group. The move has drawn sharp responses from both nations and has broad implications for international relations in the region. And to help us unpack this complex situation, we're joined by Mika Chavala, podcast and founder of Swahili Nation and One Africa. Mika, habari, and asante for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Siyabonga. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, let's find a point of departure. Ukraine and Mali, they diplomatic relations between the two. How have they been? Have they been cordial? And how much of the cutting of ties right now has been influenced by the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine?
Yeah, I think Africa for a very long time, and specifically Mali, I guess, with so many countries, we have been trying our best to stay neutral, especially when it comes to the relationship that we have with the outsiders. So for the case of Mali, they've been trying to maintain their neutrality between, Ukraine and Russia until this very point right now. And this is one of the concerns that I always talk about, because I kind of feel like most of the time, Africa, we really depend on the support that is coming from the outside, and as a result, a lot of time we face these difficulties, especially when two giants are fighting against each other. So, for the sake of what has happened just in Mali, it's simply because of what has been going on for a couple of years right now between Russia and Ukraine. The war has been going on in the Ukraine, but right now Africa is becoming a battleground, and these two enemies are fighting in our own land as a result of our soldiers, and a lot of Africans people are being killed because of that. And I think it's the right response that Mali have taken, to walk away from that relationship, because every action should have a consequences. But I still think it's not enough for what is happening. I still think Africa should not be a battleground between these two powers that are fighting out there. But it's important for us to continue to maintain that neutrality, and it's important for us Africans to be independent from our own, to stand with one another and to defend the motherland Africa by ourselves, because I do really believe that nobody can really protect Africa but Africans ourselves. We have that responsibility, we have that duty to take action to defend Africa, and nobody else can do that better than we can do. But it seems like we don't decide. It seems like we don't really come to an agreement of just the unity of Africa and defend our motherland by ourselves.
And you point out something really, really important, the fact that Africa as a continent needs to be their own protectors and decide their own fate, but then you have instances like this, obviously, Ukraine has denied its involvement in the attacks, and has described Mali's decision as being hasty. What do we know thus far from that attack? What are the details that you can give us that ultimately saw the Mali government pointing fingers at Ukraine and ultimately severing those ties?
Actually, there's one guy that I do not remember his name, that he actually confirmed that there's an involvement of Ukraine in the attack to Malian soldiers in those borders. But not only that, after they attacked the rebel group, they actually held the flag of the rebel group, and as well as the flag of Ukraine, showing the solidarity or this collaboration that they've done with the Ukraine. And I think as a result, Mali, it was very obvious for them to conclude that this is because of the involvement of the Ukraine and the rebel group in Mali. But also, there's a lot of speculation, to be honest, out there. Even can go further that who is really supporting these rebel groups in Africa. You can see, for example, some of the situation that happened, back in the past in Libya. You know what happened in Libya, and we know who actually parts were involved in that attack. And I think a lot of people have been speculating what is happening in Mali because of the progress that Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have done. As you know, right now, their confederation, they have agreed just recently. So basically, they're kind of like one people. They're fighting together. Together and supporting and protecting with one another, which seems to be a huge threat to the West and other bodies. Niger just recently break their ties from France as well as United States. The same thing with Mali and Burkina Faso. We have been seeing couple trials to take over the president of Burkina Faso as well. So what is happening in Mali is very significant to all these three countries, because right now they're kind of like one people, and kind of seems like there's a lot of resistance of what is happening in this side, because all of these countries have been actually strengthening their collaborations with Russia and breaking their ties away from France.
I want to touch a bit on that, because there's been a lot of debate about that transition between the former colonial quote unquote masters to now leaning more with Russia. A lot of people are saying, well, you're switching one occupier for the other. Russia has its own interests, the same way that we see China doing in other parts of Africa. How do you respond to that? It looks and sounds like a good move. Colonial powers or masters have been, oppressing and suppressing Africa for the longest of times. And a shift from that is one that was well appreciated, but also the switching between the two. Russia, we know, has its own interests and agendas, and a lot of people are just saying just one white master over the other. How do you respond to that?
Absolutely. I pretty much agree with the concern, and myself as well. I talk a lot about that, because I think what Africa should focus on is not on finding the next best thing. It's not about defining the next supporter who is going to stand with them, but it's about strengthening the house, our own house in the continent. Like what Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger did by coming together. That's what is supposed to happen to the 54 countries in Africa, and not siding with some other countries outside of the continent. Because for now, basically, it kind of seems like you're trying to get back on United States and France, which in the long run is not really going to support you or help you. What we have to understand is that nobody cares about Africa, or nobody will protect Africa like Africa we do. We can. So we must learn, and we must understand that we are the one that we are responsible with our own house, to build our own house, to come together as one people, as Africans, and to defend this continent. But also I understand why they're doing that, because when you look at the western side of Africa, this is Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, they break their ties with ECOWAS, because they clearly saw that ECOWAS, it was not siding with them. It was actually there working for the West. And we see a lot of complaints, we see a lot of accusations, even with our own organization, African Union, because there's a lot of things that we have been wanting them to happen. You can talk about a single passport, you can talk about free borders. These things haven't been happening for the past 60 years. And we're wondering that, okay, if you're not really working for us, who are you working for? You can see the budgets of these organizations. A huge part of these budgets are being funded and supported by European Union or other Western countries. So you can clearly see that these organizations that we have, sometimes they're not really there for the interests of the people of Africa. So you see Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, they are trying to find their own ties. They're trying to break away from this. At the same time, they're fighting with other African organizations like ECOWAS. The last African Union summit, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali, they were not invited, simply because of the coup that happened in these countries. So you could clearly see that, from their perspective, they kind of feel like, why are we being isolated? Why are we being separated? We are trying to fight for the sovereignty of our country and our people, but they look at us as an enemies. And as a result, they're running away to the Russian and everything. And I can admit, brother, like, this is the issue and problem that we have had in Africa for so long time. I think it's the time for Africa to sit down and to really figure out like what we really want for ourselves. And I think the only way forward is one Africa, and what we're working for is that, guys, regardless of our differences, regardless of what has happened in the past, I think it's the time for us to strengthening our own house. Because if we cannot build our house, then we're not really leading our house. Thomas Sankara said, "Whoever feeds you controls you," from Burkina Faso.
Mm.
And it's true. So even right now, siding with Russia, or you see African countries siding with China, I really hate it, because I kind of feel like in few years from now, like the next generation, they're going to struggle with the same thing that we're struggling today with America or with the France and other Western countries.
Before I let you go, I want to touch a bit on that withdrawal from the Economic Community of West African States by Mali. Is this a decision that has been received well on the ground by the people of Mali? I mean, we've seen the collaboration, between Senegal and Mali, and is that a priority over what one would consider a bigger economic bloc that has countries which are also very, very big and have a lot of influence, and traditionally you'd want to be a part of that bloc rather than isolating yourself within the region?
Yeah. To be honest, brother, I mean, when I look at that situation, any relationship must have must benefit you. You know what I'm saying? Like, you must get something out of it as much as you give something to them. And in the case of these three countries, all this coup that has happened, you can clearly see the people of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, they're actually happy with their current government because they see improvement. What they wanted to break their ties with France and United States. They wanted to actually see the progress in the country. They wanted to see the developing their country one step after another. And you can clearly see in this country, specifically Burkina Faso, you can see what is happening in that country. So for them breaking out from ECOWAS, for me personally, I take it as a positive thing because I think there must be consequences in everything, because the previous leadership that were leading there, it didn't seem like they were really working for the people. And you can clearly see that the people, they're the one who decided. For example, the leader of Burkina Faso, people, they have decided for him to stay over power for the next 5 years. He was supposed to stay there for only 1 year to 2 years, but people said, no, we want Ibrahim Traore for the next 5 years. And I think it's the time we see the same thing happening in Africa right now. You can see what is happening in Kenya. You can see what is happening in Nigeria. Like, you can see what is happening. There's this arising of young people who want for the best of their continent, their countries, and the next generation. Oh, what happened in Senegal as well. So I think this is the big wake-up call, especially for these organizations, because if we cannot start funding ourselves, these organizations, if we cannot stop funding and giving our own money to them, then they're not really going to work for us. Because I mean, if I give you money, basically I'm going to determine which direction you're going to go, what you're going to do. You don't have your own decision. At the time, you remember at the time when Mali and these three countries were breaking their ties with France, ECOWAS was actually supporting France against Mali. They were actually imposing sanctions on Mali and Niger and Burkina Faso. So how are we getting here? We got used to Western countries imposing sanction on us, but now we African, we're imposing sanction against each other instead of finding a proper solution to whatever that is happening in our country. And I think the most important thing is not about actually, it's about what the people want, African people want. It's no longer about what the leaders want or what these organizations want. No, what the people want. And if we do what the people want, I'm pretty sure that we're not going to be in the mess that we are right now.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Mika, thank you so much for giving us your time and unpacking the situation for us out in Mali. Kwaheri and Asante.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
There you go. That was Mika giving us kind of a lowdown on the recent diplomatic rift between Mali and Ukraine, where in a dramatic escalation, Mali has cut diplomatic ties with Ukraine following accusations that Ukraine was involved in a deadly attack on Malian soldiers and Russian mercenaries. And I think, Mika, they're making a really, really good point. The fact that you now have foreign wars being fought on African soil and Africa now having to choose sides between these two quote-unquote new ambitious colonial master wannabe. They're seeing that there's a shift on the continent and China and Russia now want to also grab the pie. We don't know what their intentions are, but it seems like the leaders of the continent, they want to change one master over the other. And one thing that I think he also mentioned is that there's a wave. The Gen Zs of the continent, are going to take power in their hands. We've seen what has happened in Kenya, what the ongoing protests out in Nigeria. And I think here in South Africa also, we had a taste of what young people can do when they're determined and they want to put their government to account during the fees must fall era in 2014, 2015. So it's going to be really, really interesting times going ahead on the continent as the younger generation starts to being a bit more conscientized and want to take control of their own destinies and future on the beautiful continent of Africa. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be speaking to Dr. Abdul Wahid, and we'll be delving on an issue that again has been one that has gripped headlines in this past week: the targeting of immigrants and Muslims out in the UK. What is sparking it? And this comes after the elections in the country. And one person made something really, really interesting. Point to look at is the fact that South Africa is literally one of the only countries that hasn't had major protests and the situation that we are seeing right now happening in the UK. India has had their elections, and after the elections, there was some kind of uprising and discontent and protests. We're seeing the UK now. They've also just come out of the elections, and the same thing is happening. So we might have dodged a bullet with the GNU, but others might be having a different view. But I think the focus on the UK will be very, very important to unpack, and we'll be doing so right after this short break.